Some touches change destinies, the kind that happen in a split second but echo through eternity, marking the moment when everything that was becomes everything that will be. For Alina, that touch came during the coronation anniversary ceremony when she stumbled while carrying ceremonial wine, reached out to steady herself, and her dirt-stained fingers brushed against King Theon's crown. The throne room erupted at gasps and horrified laughter. A slave touching the sacred crown was unthinkable, offensive, grounds for immediate punishment. Alina froze in terror, her hand still extended, waiting for the guards to drag her away and deliver whatever brutal consequence the court deemed appropriate. But King Theon didn't call the guards. He didn't order her removal. Instead, he did something that would be recorded in history books for centuries to come. He took the crown from his own head, placed it gently in her trembling hands, and said words that shattered every assumption the court held about power and worth. "Hold it properly. You'll need to get used to the weight if you're going to wear it." Alina had been born into slavery in the most literal sense. Her mother was a slave in the southern mines, her father unknown, probably another slave, or possibly an overseer who'd taken what he wanted and moved on. She'd never known freedom, never knew a time when her body and labor weren't owned by someone else. The mine owners used slaves until they broke, then replaced them with fresh bodies. Life expectancy was 25 if you were lucky. Alina's mother had lasted to 32 through sheer stubborn will, long enough to teach her daughter the survival skills that mattered. How to become invisible when overseers were angry. How to ration food to stretch meager portions. How to find moments of beauty in darkness so despair didn't consume you completely. Her mother died when Alina was 14. Collapsed in the mine shaft from exhaustion and untreated illness, they buried her in the mass grave behind the compound with no marker, no ceremony, no acknowledgement that a person had existed and mattered. Alina had cried silently that night, alone in the slave quarters, and promised herself she'd survive long enough to escape, to live free, even if just for a day, before they caught her and killed her. 2 years of careful planning, stolen supplies, and waiting for the right moment. She escaped during a transfer between mine sites, slipped away in the chaos of a storm, ran until her lungs burned and her feet bled, made it 70 miles before collapsing in a ditch, convinced she was dying, but at least dying free. A traveling merchant found her, half dead from exposure and starvation. He could have turned her in for the reward. Escaped slaves were valuable property. Instead, he fed her, clothed her, and brought her to the capital city with a forged document claiming she was his indentured servant, not a slave. Indenture was legal. Slavery was technically illegal in the capital, though everyone pretended not to notice the slaves that wealthy people kept. The merchant sold her contract to the royal palace for enough money to fund his retirement. Alina went from mine slave to palace servant, and it was like moving from hell to purgatory. Still not free, still owned, but the work was easier, the food was better, and nobody beat her unconscious for working too slowly. She'd been in the palace for 18 months when the coronation anniversary ceremony arrived. She was assigned to serve wine during the celebration, a task usually reserved for more senior servants. The head steward had been desperate because half the staff was sick with seasonal flu. Alina had been terrified of making a mistake in front of hundreds of nobles.
But she'd done serving work in the mines during special overseer events. She knew how to be invisible, how to move efficiently, how to not draw attention. The ceremony was overwhelming. More wealth displayed in one room than Alina had seen in her entire life. Nobles in clothes that cost more than a slave's life value. The king himself on a throne that seemed designed to emphasize the distance between ruler and ruled. King Theon, the immortal Beast King, wearing a crown so ancient and ornate it seemed to radiate power. Alina moved through the crowd with her wine tray, keeping her eyes down, being invisible like her mother had taught her. Serve, step back, don't make eye contact, don't draw attention. It was working perfectly until Lord Brendan, drunk and cruel, deliberately stuck out his foot as she passed. She stumbled, the tray tilting dangerously. Instinct made her reach out to catch herself. Her hand found purchase on something solid, something metallic and cool.
Something that made the entire room go silent. She looked up in horror and realized she was gripping King Theon's crown, her fingers leaving smudges on polished gold. The king himself was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Time stopped. Then Lord Brendan started laughing, loud and theatrical. "A slave touching this sacred crown. This is priceless. Look at the filth she's left on it." Other nobles joined in, their laughter sharp and cruel. Someone called for guards. Someone else suggested public flogging as appropriate punishment. Alina wanted to disappear, to die right there rather than face whatever was coming. But she couldn't move, couldn't release the crown, couldn't do anything but stand frozen while the court decided her fate. Then King Theon spoke, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade through silk. Enough. The silence was immediate and absolute. He reached up and carefully removed the crown from his own head. The crown Alina was still touching with trembling fingers. Then he did the impossible. He placed it fully in her hands. The weight was surprising, heavier than it looked, and she nearly dropped it. He steadied her grip with his own hands. "Hold it properly," he said, loud enough for the entire court to hear. "You'll need to get used to the weight if you're going to wear it." The throne room's silence became something physical, pressing against eardrums like pressure before a storm. The court erupted in protests. "Your Majesty, this is madness," Lady Seraphina gasped. "She's a slave. She has no right to even look at the crown, much less touch it." "I decide who has rights in my kingdom," Theon said calmly, still holding the crown steady in Alina's shaking hands. "And I've decided this woman will wear this crown." Alina's mind couldn't process what was happening. This had to be some elaborate, cruel joke. Kings didn't give crowns to slaves. This wasn't how the world worked. "Your Majesty," she whispered, barely audible. "I don't understand." "You will." He turned to address the court, still keeping one hand on the crown to help her hold it. "This is Alina. As of this moment, she is no longer a slave or servant. She is under my direct protection with full status as a free citizen," King directly. Lord Brendan, who'd tripped her, had gone pale. Theon continued, his voice carrying authority that made nobles straighten instinctively. "Furthermore, I am declaring my intention to marry her. The coronation will be conducted within 3 months, at which point she will be your queen. The formal betrothal begins tonight." The throne room exploded in chaos, nobles shouting protests and questions, guards looking confused about whether to intervene, servants pressed against walls, terrified and fascinated in equal measure. And Alina, standing in the center of it all, holding a crown that weighed more than hope and felt like the most dangerous thing she'd ever touched. Theon ignored the chaos. He took the crown from her hands gently and returned it to his own head. Then he extended his hand to her. "Come with me. We have much to discuss." She took his hand because what else could she do? He led her out of the throne room while the court descended into pandemonium behind them. Theon brought Alina to his private quarters, a suite of rooms that were comfortable rather than ostentatious. He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit, eat." There was food on a side table, clearly prepared for the king's later meal. Alina sat because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore, but she couldn't imagine eating. "Your Majesty, what just happened? I need you to explain because I don't understand any of this." He poured wine, handed her a glass. "What happened is I made a decision I've been avoiding for 3 centuries. And you gave me the perfect opportunity to finally make it." "That doesn't explain anything." He settled into the chair across from her. "No, I suppose it doesn't. Let me start differently. Do you know why they call me the Beast King?" "Because you can shift into a wolf. They say you've lived for 300 years. They say a lot of things. Most of them are oversimplified or wrong. But yes, I can shift. And yes, I'm immortal, or close enough to it. What they don't talk about is why. What few people know is that my immortality is tied to an ancient magical compact. The crown you touched isn't just decorative. It's a conduit for magic that binds me to this kingdom. That magic requires balance. A ruler who bears it alone becomes gradually corrupted by the weight. Every king before me either died young or went mad. I've lasted 3 centuries by being careful, by maintaining distance, by not letting myself care too much about anything, because attachment accelerates the corruption.
Alina tried to follow his logic. So why are you telling me this? Why did you just declare you're going to marry me? Because the compact has a provision nobody's used in 500 years. If the bearer of the crown shares the burden with a willing partner, the magic balances. 2 people carrying the weight instead of 1. The corruption stops. But it has to be genuine partnership. Forced or coerced won't work. The magic requires true acceptance, true choice. Her heart was racing. And you think I'm going to choose to marry you, a man I just met, a king who just upended my entire existence? No, he said honestly. I don't expect you to choose that at all, which is why I'm giving you 3 months. 3 months to live as a free person, to learn what that means, to understand what I'm actually offering. Then you decide. If you say no, you remain free with resources to build whatever life you want. If you say yes, we share this burden together. Either way, you get to choose.
Nobody's ever given me a choice before. I know. That's why I'm starting now. She looked at this immortal king who just declared his intention to marry a slave in front of his entire court, who was offering her freedom with no strings attached, who was treating her like a person capable of meaningful choice. Why me? What made you decide this today? He was quiet for a long moment. Truthfully, I've been watching you for months. You're efficient, kind to other servants. You share your food with those who have less. You find moments of beauty in terrible circumstances. You're exactly the kind of person this kingdom needs in power. Someone who understands what it means to have nothing and chooses compassion anyway. But you were a slave. Yes? And that matters because slaves don't become queens. Kings don't marry people they own. This doesn't make sense. He leaned forward. Here's what makes sense. I'm tired, Alina. 300 years of carrying this burden alone.
I'm tired of watching good people suffer while corrupt nobles play political games. I'm tired of the distance required to avoid caring too much. I want a partner who understands real struggle, not performative court drama. Someone who'll rule with actual empathy instead of theoretical benevolence. You don't know me. You don't know if I'm capable of any of that. You're right, which is why we're taking 3 months to find out. No pressure, no expectations, just time to see if this insane idea has any chance of working. She held the wine glass with hands that had finally stopped shaking. What happens now? Now you move into guest quarters appropriate for a potential queen. You get a teacher to learn reading, writing, etiquette, history, everything you'll need whether you accept or not. You get clothing, resources, freedom to go anywhere in the palace. And you get me, checking in regularly, getting to know you, letting you get to know me. Then in 3 months, you decide. She thought about the mines, about her mother's grave with no marker, about 18 months as a palace servant, better than slavery, but still not free, about this impossible offer from an immortal king who just changed her entire world. All right, I'll take the 3 months, but I'm not promising anything beyond that. I wouldn't want you to. Genuine choice means genuine uncertainty. That's the point. The 3 months that followed were the strangest education Alina could have imagined. She moved into quarters that were larger than the entire slave compound she'd grown up in, had more clothes than she'd owned in her entire life, ate food that actually tasted good instead of just preventing starvation, and slowly, carefully, learned what it meant to be free. Her teacher was Master Aldrich, an elderly scholar with patience and kindness she hadn't known existed in nobility. He taught her reading and writing without judgment for her starting point.
Explained history as stories rather than dry facts. answered every question she had about how the kingdom actually functioned. Within weeks, she was reading basic texts. Within 2 months, she was working through philosophy and political theory. Theon visited daily, sometimes for formal lessons about governance, more often for casual conversation. They'd walk in the gardens or sit in the library, and he'd tell her about his 3 centuries of rule, the mistakes he'd made, the people he'd lost, the loneliness of immortality. She told him about the mines, about her mother, about what it felt like to be property instead of person, about the small rebellions that kept her human when the world wanted to make her an object. They found common ground in unexpected places. Both had survived by becoming good at reading people. Both valued competence over status. Both had seen enough cruelty to recognize kindness when it appeared. The court watched with fascination and horror. Nobles who'd laughed at her touching the crown now bowed when she passed. Servants who'd been her peers treated her with a mix of awe and suspicion. Lady Seraphina, the chief advisor, remained openly hostile. "Your Majesty, this experiment is destabilizing the court. The nobles are threatening to withdraw support." "Let them," Theon said during a council meeting. "Any noble who can't accept that worth has nothing to do with birth status is welcome to leave my service. We'll replace them with people who actually understand merit." "But she's uneducated," Lord Pembroke protested. "How can she possibly advise on governance?" "She's been educated for exactly 2 months and already understands the impact of policies on common people better than you do after 40 years in court. That's not a failure of her intelligence. That's evidence your education was insufficient." The council meetings became battlegrounds, but gradually, grudgingly, some nobles began to see what Theon saw. Alina asked questions they'd never considered, pointed out policy consequences they'd overlooked, brought perspectives that transformed theoretical discussions into practical solutions. And she didn't apologize for her background, didn't try to hide where she'd come from. She used it, weaponized her experience to force nobles to confront realities they'd been ignoring. The midpoint came 6 weeks before the deadline, when a crisis forced everything into focus. A slave rebellion in the Sun and the Provinces, triggered by brutal conditions in the very mines where Alina had been born. The governor wanted military suppression. The nobles supported him. Alina stood in the council chamber and said the words that would define her. "No." Every head turned. Theon gestured for her to continue. "Explain." "Those people aren't rebelling because they're criminals or troublemakers. They're rebelling because they're being worked to death in conditions that would kill anyone. I survived those mines." "I know what it costs. You want to stop the rebellion? Fix the conditions. End slavery completely. Give them reason to believe the kingdom values their lives." "That's radical nonsense," the governor sputtered. "The economy depends on mine production. We can't afford to pay wages." "Then you can't afford to run mines," Alina shot back. "If your business model requires owning people and working them to death, your business model is evil. Find another way or shut down." The nobles erupted. Theon raised a hand for silence. "She's right." The room went quiet. He continued. His voice carried absolute authority. "Slavery is hereby abolished throughout the kingdom. Mine owners have 6 months to transition to paid labor or close operations. The crown will subsidize wages during transition. Anyone who attempts to continue slave operations will face criminal charges." "But Your Majesty," Lord Pembroke tried. "I said the law is enacted. This meeting is over." Everyone left except Theon and Alina. He looked at her with something that might have been pride. "You just changed the kingdom's economic structure with one speech. Are you sure about this?" "More sure than I've been about anything. Those people deserve freedom. They deserve to matter. If becoming queen means I can make that happen, then maybe I'm supposed to say yes." He took her hand carefully. "Don't say yes because of policy. Say yes if you actually want this life, this partnership, this impossible role. Because it will be hard. The nobles will fight you. The changes will be brutal. You'll make enemies and face dangers you can't imagine yet. I've already faced most of those things as a slave. At least as queen, I'll have power to fight back. She met his eyes. "I need to ask you something honest. Do you want to marry me because of the magic and the burden sharing, or because of me?" "Both. The magic means I need a partner. You being who you are means I want that partner to be you. I've lived 300 years, Alina. I've met thousands of people, and you're the first one who makes immortality feel like something I'd want to share instead of endure. That's not obligation, that's choice." She felt something shift in her chest. The fear that had been driving her decisions transformed into something else. Not certainty. He smiled, genuine and relieved. "Then let's build something extraordinary." The final 6 weeks moved quickly. Alina's education intensified, now focused specifically on queenship. The abolition of slavery created chaos as predicted. Mine owners protested. Economic disruption rippled through southern provinces. But freed slaves began organizing, forming workers' cooperatives, proving they could run operations more efficiently than the old brutal system. Alina visited the provinces personally, against all advice, went to the mines where she'd been born, stood in the compound where her mother had died, and spoke to the newly freed workers with an authority born from shared experience. "I was one of you. I know what you've survived. This kingdom failed you for generations. I'm here to promise it won't fail you anymore. Your labor has value. Your lives matter. And anyone who tries to return you to slavery will answer to me personally." They believed her because she knew their language, their struggles, their pain. She didn't speak as a distant noble making theoretical promises. She spoke as someone who'd lived their nightmare and survived. Workers who'd been ready to rebel became invested in making the new system work because finally, someone in power actually understood. The nobility was split. Half saw Alina as dangerous radical. Half recognized she'd prevented violent revolution and created sustainable change. The ones who accepted her did so because competence was undeniable. The ones who opposed her plotted to undermine her at every opportunity. The wedding approached rapidly. Preparations consumed the palace. Alina insisted on a ceremony that honored both her background and her new role. Former slaves would attend alongside nobles. The feast would include food from working districts alongside fancy court cuisine. The vows would be traditional, but she'd add her own words about partnership and shared burden. Lady Serafina made one final attempt to stop it. "Your Majesty, there's still time to reconsider. This marriage will destabilize centuries of tradition." "Good," Theon said simply. "Those traditions needed destabilizing. She's going to change everything. I'm counting on it." The wedding day arrived with sunshine that felt like approval from the universe. Alina wore a gown that was beautiful but practical, made by former slave seamstresses who'd taken pride in creating something meaningful. She walked into the throne room where hundreds watched. Nobles and commoners mixed together in unprecedented unity. Theon stood waiting at the altar, still wearing his crown, but somehow looking less distant than she'd ever seen him. She walked to him alone because she had no family to give her away, no father to transfer ownership. She came as a free woman making a free choice. The ceremony included traditional vows and also her addition. "I was born in chains and lived in darkness. You offered me light and choice. Today, I choose to share your burden, not because prophecy demands it or magic requires it, but because I believe we can build something better together. I choose partnership over isolation, compassion over cruelty, a kingdom where worth is measured by character, not birth. And I choose you, Theon, because you saw a slave touch your crown and recognized not disrespect, but potential." Theon's vows were equally personal. "I've lived 300 years alone because I believe distance protected me. You taught me that distance doesn't prevent pain, it just prevents connection. Today, I choose to share this burden with someone who understands what power should be used for. I choose partnership over isolation, justice over tradition, a kingdom where slavery is history and dignity is universal. And I choose you, Alina, because you touched my crown and reminded me that sacred objects mean nothing if they don't serve sacred purposes. When they placed the second crown on her head, the crown Theon had commissioned specifically for her, lighter than his, but equally beautiful, the magic responded. Everyone in the throne room felt it, a surge of power that balanced and strengthened. The burden Theon had carried alone for centuries divided between them, and for the first time in his long life, he felt the weight ease. Alina felt the magic settle into her bones, powerful but not overwhelming because it was shared. They were crowned king and queen together, and the kingdom erupted in celebration. The years that followed proved Theon right. Alina transformed governance by bringing a perspective that centuries of noble rule had lacked. She established workers' rights protections, created educational systems that served everyone, not just wealthy families, built infrastructure in districts nobles had ignored for generations. And she did it all with Theon's absolute support. They ruled as genuine partners. He handled military and foreign policy. She handled domestic reform and social justice. Together, they made decisions that balanced tradition and progress. They argued frequently because partnership doesn't mean agreement. But they learned to listen, to compromise, to build solutions that honored both perspectives. The court that had laughed at her touching the crown eventually came to respect and even admire her. Not everyone made that journey. Some nobles left rather than accept the new order, but they were replaced by competent people from all backgrounds who earned their positions through merit rather than inheritance. 10 years into their marriage, Alina stood in the throne room for an anniversary ceremony. She wore her crown with the ease of practice, no longer surprised by the weight. Theon stood beside her, and when she looked at him, she saw not the immortal king, but her partner, her friend, the person who'd given her choice when she'd never had it before. He caught her looking and smiled. "What are you thinking?" "That I touched your crown accidentally and ended up wearing one. That's either the strangest love story ever or proof that destiny has a sense of humor. Probably both." He took her hand. "Any regrets? About saying yes? About this impossible life?" She thought about the mines, about slavery, about her mother who'd never lived free, about the kingdom they'd transformed and the people they'd helped, about partnership that was hard but worth it. No regrets.
"This is exactly what I chose, and I choose it again." They stood together before their people, the Beast King and the Slave Queen, living proof that worth has nothing to do with where you start and everything to do with who you choose to become. That sacred objects are only as valuable as the purposes they serve, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is recognizing humanity in unexpected places and giving it the power to transform everything. If this story reminded you that everyone deserves dignity and choice, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment with the word moon if you believe true power comes from lifting people up, not keeping them down. Share this video with someone who needs to know that where you start doesn't determine where you end up. Sometimes the hand that touches the crown accidentally is exactly the hand meant to wear it. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most sacred thing about power is using it to free others,
not enslave them.